So the title claims this video is about semitone shifts, and I didn't know how to call these types of chords, so I've just called them semitone shifts. But what we're talking about is basically these 4 different types of harmonic analyses. And they seem like 4 different ones, but it's actually all the same thing. It's what happens when you take a major chord and raise the root by a semitone, creating a half diminished chord. Or the other way around, when you take a half diminished chord, lower the root and create a major chord. This is why in the key of G major, you don't just have C major 7th, which is native to the key, and E flat major 7th, which is borrowed, just like B flat major 7th, from G minor. You can also play F major 7th, because what we're doing is taking F sharp half diminished and lowering the F sharp to F to create F major 7th. This is why the flat 7th chord can not just be dominant, borrowed from minor, but also major 7th. It's a semitone shift. And this gives us another chord to play around with as well. See, when we play the 4 chord, we can raise the root to create a sharp 4, half diminished chord. Okay, now one modern pop song that does this is Love on Top. But love on top, baby, 'cause you're the one that I love. Baby, you're the one I need, and the only one I see. Come on, baby, it's you. You're the one that gives your all. You're the one I can always call when I need to make everything stop. Finally. Okay, so this is where this chord is being used in a modern pop song. You can do the same thing in a minor key. So in G major, we can use F major 7th and C sharp half diminished. And in the key of E minor, we have the same chords at our disposal. So let's play something in E minor. Or in another way that might be a bit more common, that's not quite the same thing because this is a line cliché. A line cliché being when you take a chord and just take one note of that chord and raise or lower it continuously by a semitone, but you end up on the same chord. Now, why is this interesting? Well, we can borrow chords from the relative minor when we're in the major key. So in the major key, we can just as well use A flat major 7th, borrowing the A half diminished from the relative minor, but now using a semitone shift to make it A flat major 7th. And the same thing can be done with the sharp 6 chord. Now, what I really like about that A flat major 7th, you can end the song. This is kind of a cliche, but it might not be so common that you've already heard it. Now you can let the vocalist sing the tonic at the end of a song. And you can play a bunch of major 7th chords to eventually end up back on the 1. So the singer might expect you to do something like da da da, just ending on G, but instead you play this. Da 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 da. And you can use major 7th chords, like a bunch of different major 7th chords, to create this weird tension while each chord sounds sort of resolved anyway, because major 7th chords tend to sound like they're well put in place, so to speak. Ending on a completely different major 7th chord, where the tonic that they're actually singing is now the major 7th of this chord, before it ends up being a resolved note. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but there's something even more interesting that I still need to tell you guys about. Now there's this very typical chord progression from classical music, going from 1 to 1 over its 3rd to 4, maybe not major 7th, then to the sharp 4 chord, ending up on 5, back to 1. Now what I actually played there was the 1 over 5 and then 5 to 1. And what's weird here, this sharp 4 chord serves as a chord that wants to resolve to a subdominant function. Now, why is this subdominant function? Well, what am I talking about? Well, it's just G, it's tonic, or it's actually something that's an extension of the 5 chord. It's not sus4, not just na 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 na, but but we're harmonizing it with na na. So it's na 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 na. Right? So this ends up being a chord that wants to resolve back down to 5, making this subdominant, dominant, tonic. It's a weird way to think about it maybe, but functionally speaking that's what it ends up sounding like in this context. But what I'm more interested in is the chord that comes before this sharp 4 chord. See, classical musicians might come up with variations on that chord. So instead of playing half diminished, going to this chord, they might want a bit more tension. And they might lower one more note to create a diminished chord. Now if this diminished chord just goes to 5, that's just a dim substitution, we've talked about this. But if this diminished chord ends up going to subdominant function, or in other words, in this case to 1/5, weird to think of it as a subdominant, but that's what it is in this context, then it acts as a sharp 4 chord. Okay, so this is weird, right? Now take this into consideration. What if we're playing G, and we're going to B flat diminished, resolving to A minor, and then getting us back to 1. Now what did that B flat diminished do there? That's really weird. Now diminished chords are symmetrical. You can move them up and down in minor thirds, and you end up with the same chord. So what this actually is, go up in minor third, you're on C sharp. This is actually the sharp 4 chord, just its 7th is now the bass note. Again, maybe a little bit weird, but it's a diminished 7th, which is enharmonic to the major 6th. So if we're 1 here, then here is the major 6th. So we're using a diminished chord that's actually the sharp 4. Why is it the sharp 4? Why does this work? Well, it goes back to subdominant. That's why it works. This is how a diminished chord can go down a half step or a semitone before resolving up even further. So that's one interesting thing. Now you can explain how this sound works. Because it does work, you can hear it. But that's not all, we can take this even further. Now think of this, a half diminished chord has a diminished 5th. A diminished chord has a diminished 5th and a diminished 7th. Now what if we also diminish the 3rd? What do we end up with? Well, here's half diminished. That finger is taking the 7th, so we lower it. We get half diminished. The pinky here is taking the 3rd. If we lower it, we get this. Now, if you know the sound or know the chord shape on guitar, this is a dominant chord over its 7th, but it functions differently than you might expect. See, when we're playing in any sort of key, whatever it is we're doing, if we got the dominant chord, the 7th na, 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 wants to resolve down, right? Now think of this context. What does the 7th want to do here? It wants to go up. So that's functionally different than you might expect, and we consider this to be not a flat 7th, but an augmented 6th. Again, really weird. But if you've ever heard of the double diminished chord, this is what we're talking about. This is the double diminished chord, and it wants to resolve to subdominant, or basically to the tonic over its 5th, which acts as a chord that wants to go to 5, going back to 1. So that's really, really strange. It's very colorful and full of tension. It's not what you might expect. There's so much tension there. And when it finally resolves, it's so sweet. Right? So now you know how the augmented 4th chord works and how the other variations work and what you might be able to do with them. These are semitone shifts. I hope I explained something new to you. I helped you understand something a bit different. If you like this kind of content, remember to subscribe because you'll get more of it. And for now, see you guys next time.